going to be talking to you tonight is about the Brahman Grail. Again, I named it after the first person I saw it in. And this is what is called the envelope of consciousness. When I started to put together everything, not just simply sketch people's consciousness, but actually put the material together, I tried to find out as much as I could about the level at which I was reading. When I read intuitively, clairvoyantly, I read at the original injury level. My training was such that I had to be very efficient and effective. And to read at a level that is only a symptom of a problem and not where the problem originates is very inefficient and ineffective. So I was trained to read at the deepest level that you can go, which it turns out is what is called the causal body level. And I understood very early on that I was reading at that level, but the problem was that when I went to the internet and when I went to the library, I found practically nothing at all about the causal body. The Orientals knew that a causal body existed, but they did not have but a line or two about the configuration or what it might be about. There is one book out, and it's in the back of the 4-page document that you have called The Causal Body, that does talk about what I'm talking about today, but the information is so theoretical that it is basically unusable. And it is very religious sounding and very mystical sounding, and again, very unusable in terms of your children, in terms of your family, in terms of yourself. There's really not much at all that you can do with it. Once you have this information and these sketches and you go to that book, then you're able to get much more information than I'm going to give you today, and I suggest that you do that because you're going to find it very interesting. But in order for it to be interesting at all, for those of you who are very much of this world and modern age that we live in today, these sketches are going to be very helpful for you to be able to take advantage of what this man wrote about. I believe it was over 60 years ago. What is consciousness? Consciousness is the knowledge of what is happening around one, the state of being conscious. In terms of what we know, it has to do with our 5 senses. It's how we take in our world around us. And this structure, the Brahman Grail, is the envelope of this consciousness. And the concept is, and many people will tell you this, and they will repeat the phrase, we are all one. And I've always wondered, if we're all one, why are we so distinct? It didn't make any sense. Apparently at one point, and the book on the causal body will tell you that, we were all one. And because of this envelope, the Brahman Grail, we individualize our consciousness while we are alive. So that is what consciousness has to do with the structure. At this point in time, this is not going to have much meaning for you. This is very easy. Once I finish, as I speak, perhaps it's going to be a little bit difficult for you to understand. But what you need to know in terms of this moment in this presentation is that what I'm going to be showing you is the causal body. It is the envelope of consciousness. That consciousness is not individualized until it is in the causal body. So we are all one at one point, and obviously at some other point we will end up being all one again. For me to, in order to be able to start this, we need to review what we consider to be who we are, what we are. And I will tell you my version of the world that is supported by tantric literature that's over 6,000 years old. When I do healings, these are the structures that I see, the slide that I'm going to show next. Here in the West, we consider ourselves to be simply physical bodies. Those of us that are in alternative understand that we have other bodies or aspects of ourselves, other levels of ourselves, other dimensions of ourselves that are not in the physical. In the Orient, they have known that forever, but this is a relatively new concept in this part of the world, and acupuncture and the acceptance of it is an example of how we are today starting to accept that we are not just a physical body. The phantom limb syndrome that you've all heard about, having a limb removed and then having it still hurt a year later, is another example that even though they took a physical aspect of you, you still have a non-physical aspect that's very much a part of you and can give you a tremendous amount of pain. This is the system as I see it, and not so coincidentally the way that tantric yogas see it. We have a physical body, and when I do a healing, an energetic healing, this is the level that I see at. I do not see you in a physical configuration. I see you as a triangle with the apex pointed up. When I'm doing a healing on your spiritual body, what I'm seeing is a triangle with the apex pointed down. When I first started to do healings of this nature, I was completely lost and confused, as perhaps you are right now. But as usual, in terms of my training and my determination and my intention, I continued forward because I knew intuitively that I was on track, and my clients and my friends were telling me that the healings were working. So I knew that I was not making a mistake, even though I did not understand what it is that I was seeing. And the third at the bottom configuration that you're seeing is what the Brahman Grail is, which is a funnel, which is the funnel in which consciousness is poured that individualizes us. So these are the different aspects, levels, dimensions of ourselves that I work with and that the Tantrics found 6,000 years ago. I did not pick it up from Tantric literature. When I do a healing, because of my training to go to original injury, this is the level at which I heal at, and this is the level at which I diagnose at. When we are completely balanced and centered and aligned, not just our physical body, but the other aspects of ourselves, our subtle body, our electromagnetic body, etc. There's not a consensus as to how many different non-physical bodies we have. This is what we look like. Not so coincidentally, this is a symbol throughout history of perfection and of wholeness. And I don't know how many people are aware that it is symbolic of what our different bodies look when we are, again, aligned and centered in our heart chakra, when our physical body is aligned with our spiritual bodies. Let's talk a moment about symbols. If this structure actually exists as I see it, then there must have been some evidence of it previously to me standing here and speaking to you today, and to this gentleman Powell writing the book called The Causal Body. Symbols represent something that is abstract, and there are many symbols throughout our history that represent not just this that you're seeing now, which is when we are centered and when we are whole, but the Brahman Grail itself. Let's look at some symbols that appear to point to the existence of this causal body, which I am calling the Brahman Grail. These are halos that you see not just in Christian art in the Renaissance times, but that you see throughout history, including in the Orient. And you can read what's at the bottom, because from here I cannot. This is a Kirlian photograph of Helene Lane, the lady that introduced me, that assisted me in putting together this presentation. This is a photograph that picks up emanations of light from the body, and I'm sure Wang right now is cringing because I'm not describing it scientifically. Any of you can go out and take a photograph of this nature. I thought that Helene energetically, not physical body level, looked like this all the time, but she informed me that before she took the photograph, she wanted to look as perfect as possible. And so she meditated and imagined herself looking this way, and the consequences are that she has emanations of light from her Brahman Grail, from her causal body level, that appear like this, which is in the shape, very obviously, of a halo. She was able to do this through meditation and through creative visualization. And the best news of all of that I'm going to present to you tonight is that this level, the causal body level, is very much self-correcting and self-adjusting. When you're with a child, you need to do it for them, but with somebody, teenager on up, they can self-adjust and self-correct very easily. The Indian headdress, again, is symbolic of the emanations of life force from the head. And then, of course, we have all of the religious figures in the Renaissance time. This is not new information that I'm giving to you today, but I'm giving it to you hopefully at a level that will make it operational, that it's not just simply symbolic, but it's something that you can actually, when you leave here today, have more of an understanding about yourself. And perhaps if you have people in your family that are emotionally not well or have learning disabilities, understand that there is very much more hope for them today, and in a way that's very effective and efficient and definitely not costly. Talking about systems, this is my brain-mind model. At the bottom is the two lobes of the brain that are the physical body level. We all know about that. The scientists have been cutting them up forever, and they're still not finding what they want. And they can continue to cut them up, and they're not going to find it because it is not at that level. It is at a level that is non-physical, non-material. And if that hits your boggle threshold, then I guess you're going to have to throw out everything that Einstein worked with, because he worked very much at the level of the non-physical. This has been declared the decade of the brain in this country, and every major country in the world holds consciousness conferences every year because everyone is hot on the trail of what consciousness is. So what we're looking at here is of critical importance. In terms of this model, the second part that I see, and this is my information, when I am looking at a child with brain damage, or even children that are brought to me that appear to be lazy, this is the electromagnetic, what I call the electromagnetic brain, and it is a circuitry around which electricity travels. And when there is a dent in it, or if the consistency is like jello, I'm looking at somebody with a problem. When there's a dent, sometimes I'm looking at a kid with a football injury. If there's a whole section of it that's squashed, I could be looking at someone with a stroke. If it's a bit wobbly, I'm probably looking at epilepsy. And if you're missing a quadrant or 2 quadrants, I'm definitely looking at cerebral palsy. So this is a level that I believe modern science is very close to having a total grip on. This is not my level of interest, though I do work at this level when I work with brain damaged children. But this has not been of my interest. The focus of my interest in what I'm going to speak of today is the third level and the deepest level of your brain-mind system. And that is at the top in the shape of a cross. Now, are we getting religious here? We're not. The cross has been a symbol throughout history, at least 1,000 years before Christ. So it has nothing to do with religion. It has to do with being symbolic of something, and of course, it is symbolic of this structure. All of the lines that you see, except for the cross one, are conduits of energy. The center axis is a conduit of energy. It pulls in energy from the cosmos. You could call it energy from the source, energy from God, however you wish to name it. And the bottom has a funnel on it that pulls in earth energy. The cross line is the Roldan, and that is the division between the 2 aspects of yourself that not only I, but the tantrics have identified. Underneath the Roldan is the physical aspect of your life. Above it is the spiritual aspect of your life. In psychology, I believe this line is what they refer to as the limen, the division between the conscious and the subconscious. And it is where the word subliminal comes from. This line moves. The center axis can be misshapen, but basically stays in the same place. This cross line, the Roldan, moves. If it is centered across your solar plexus, you are looking at the world through the eyeglass of your emotions, because the solar plexus, for those of us that are in alternative complementary medicine, that is what is called our garbage can of emotions. So if you hold that division between your physical life and spiritual life at your solar plexus, you view the world through emotions, at which time, according to my training, you do not have an effective read or a real good grip on information because it becomes polluted. The ideal place for this line to be is at your heart level, at which time you're going to be viewing the world through the eyes of unconditional love. That is also the level that it has to be at for you to be in the flow when you're doing sports, and the level it has to be at when you're doing music, which they call being in the pocket. So it's a very interesting concept that is not simply something that is theoretical, but is definitely very, very usable. The third line there that is important is a transceptor, and this phrase was coined by Debbie Stuckey because we could not find a proper phrase. There are oriental names to this, and the main one is called nadis, N-A-D-I-S, and these are rivers or channels of energy, and there are many in the human body. The acupuncture system that was found 2,000 years ago are nadis, or channels of energy. I only put one up here on the screen to not confuse you. It is possible that we have 70,000 of them in our system at the causal body level. And again, when you see my sketches, you'll see only a few, but again, my system did not want to overwhelm me with 70,000 transceptors to where I would not know what I was looking at. So I will be showing you just a few of them, which is the way I see it. The way that I read is that I want the information that is pertinent and that is necessary for me to have to be able to create change. And for me to see 70,000 transceptors is overwhelming and will not be useful to anybody at all, particularly to the person I'm trying to help. Therefore, because of my intention, I see what it is that I need to see. And those of you that are energy workers, you can set that in your intention also, to read at the causal body level or at the level of original injury. In searching out what it was exactly that I was looking at, particularly after I saw that different people had different transceptors in different quadrants of this Brahman system. I read a book called The Holy Grail, In Search of the Holy Grail, by Mr. Matthews, who's been writing forever on this subject. And I found this sketch, which is a symbolic sketch of how the Celtics described the Holy Grail over 2,000 years ago. So again, we have a reference. What you're seeing here are the 4 elements that all the indigenous peoples of this planet feel that we are made up of, plus the 5th one, which is air, which is ether, which would be what I imagine is consciousness. When I was working with Gail Marshall, she was the one who explained to me that the children that I was seeing that were ADD, that had a lot of transceptors, conduits of energy, in the fire quadrant, were always hyperactive and not just attention deficit. So whatever is happening in these quadrants will indicate what it is that's happening in the consciousness of the person that I am sketching or that I'm looking at. And this is where the magic of this whole structure is. Because by having this information, you are able to, without doing testing, without medical advice, without very much expertise, yes, an ability to be able to see at that level, it is very easy and efficient to diagnose. And for those of you who are thinking now, well, that's an irresponsibility, it's really very, very simple. If you have an awful lot of unusual configurations in the fire quadrant, and the configurations don't droop, you're talking about somebody who has hyperactive issues. It's as simple as that. If they droop, then they have a lot of activity, but they don't demonstrate it. They are showing it in terms of depression. But again, let's not get too caught up in that. Going back to symbolism again, the moods that we have, and I want to go back to the previous, the moods that we have, the way we describe our moods are a description of the way these transceptors look that totally match the way the person feels. When you have a depression, these transceptors look very much down and droopy, and that's the way we describe somebody who's depressed. They're down and they're droopy. When these transceptors intertwine, more than one intertwines, as in a braiding, you have somebody who's very mixed up, who's very confused, and who's very convoluted. When you have these transceptors twirling, you're looking at somebody who's very hyperactive, and depending upon the quadrant that they're in, they could be in a manic state and not simply be a hyperactive child. When you see spheres or blocks on these transceptors, you're looking at an emotional block. You're looking at somebody with repressed emotions. So even though it would appear that up to now this information has not been available, intuitively we have understood that these transceptors point downward when we're depressed, because we say that when we're depressed we're down. We don't say that when we're depressed that we're up. And when we're happy, by the way, these transceptors do point upwards. Again, these mood states, as we describe them simply, not as a psychiatrist would describe them, are symbolic of the configurations, of the equivalent configuration in the Brahman Grail. What does the Holy Grail have to do with the Brahman Grail? When these transceptors, these channels of energy, are in the proper configuration and they point up, they actually are in the shape of the funnel or the cup. It is my opinion, and you're welcome not to accept it. It's not a critical part of this for you to accept this. When you are in that state, and in that configuration, you are in a configuration that is what I call in a receive mode, which you are receiving information. This system has everything to do with receiving information at a non-physical level. In order, if you remember back to Helene Lane's configuration, you will see that it matches that halo that was there. What is the relationship between the Brahman Grail and the physical body? It's not in the same plane, it's not in the same dimension, but it does have a relationship to the physical body. It is several inches behind our central nervous system, not so coincidentally. It starts at the pineal gland and it goes down to your pubic bone. And it should be aligned with your back, your central nervous system. If it is not aligned with your back, if it is not straight, then you will have a corresponding physical ailment. And I believe that here is the mystery of why you can go to a chiropractor week in and week out and not become straightened, because this is the causal body level, the level where cause resides. If this Brockman-Grail center axis is not totally straight, your back is not going to be straight. And when I draw someone's Brockman, I can tell them without them offering the information that they have a problem in their neck, their hip, their shoulder, the center of the back. So until this is straightened, you will be constantly at the mercy of needing to see somebody to have adjustments. The good news is that at this level, thought creates the change. You don't need a physical manipulation and you do not need medication. With your thought alone, you can change how it lays corresponding to your back and your nervous system. This is, again, a conduit. It doesn't look like a conduit. It's a thin line. You're going to see it in a few moments. And again, we're still into the boring part of this, but I needed to give you the baseline information for you to have something to build this information on. This is a conduit of energy. When this is unblocked, you feel healthy. When it is straight, you are structurally sound. And this is the system that energizes your physical body and your nervous system. So when you are not well, if you can go back to the system or work with somebody who works at this level, you are going to the original injury level. About 6 months ago, I started to say intuitively, why is it that we don't look at people from the back? Why do we only look at them from the front? And I said, I think there's some interesting things going on in the back of our system. At that point, I had not looked at the relationship of this structure to the physical body. And when I started to look at people from the side, I found that if I energetically just kind of pulled them open in the back, that I would be able to create changes, in other words, healings, much more dramatically quick than if I worked with them energetically from the front. Again, I wasn't working with their physical body. I don't know enough about this part of what I am telling you. I think, again, many of you out there are more than welcome to start viewing people intuitively and clairvoyantly from the back, and I think you're going to find yourself in for a surprise because your effectiveness level and rate should go up dramatically. This is where cause resides, this is where we start out at, and this is where you can affect change much more quickly. This system handles the information that comes from our non-physical senses. Our central nervous system handles information that comes from our 5 physical senses. Is it a coincidence that this system starts at the top, at the level of our pineal gland, but outside of it, outside the body? So we have the Brockman, the pineal, and then the thalamus. The thalamus, according to what I've been reading, is supposed to be the seat of consciousness. It's considered by many scientists to be the seat of consciousness. It's a grand central station of the information that our 5 physical senses brings in. Well, the Brockman behind the pineal is where our non-physical senses bring in information. That's interesting. But what's most interesting, that I just found a week ago, because I'm still in the process of researching, is the pineal was considered by Descartes several hundred years ago to be the place in our bodies where our body meets our soul. So we have the physical senses coming in at the thalamus, the non-physical senses coming in at the Brockman behind the pineal, and the pineal in the center. Even scientists will tell you today that they don't know much about the pineal other than the fact that it regulates whether you're asleep and awake and has a lot to do with melatonin. I know nothing further than that, though believe me, when I finish this lecture, I'm going to start very nicely to explore it because it seems to be an interesting component. These last 2 weeks, I've spent a lot of time trying to give to you how this Brockman system relates to the physical body. Until 2 weeks ago, I was too busy trying to fill in the holes as to what it had to do with consciousness and learning disabilities and emotional illnesses. So now we're going to get into the interesting part, hopefully, because I'm also tired of this. This can be tedious. We're going to go into this life cycle of a Brockman. When I sketched this, I still was not looking at the bottom half of people. Thank God, I might have been overwhelmed. So that triangle at the bottom actually has the 3rd line. So what are we looking at here? We're looking at an unborn child. And what did I tell you about my system that I see that the tantrics saw also 6,000 years ago? That your physical body is represented by a triangle. So when I saw this, I understood, my goodness, there's the physical body. The point at the top, which is really too large, is the place where the umbilical cord is feeding this physical body from the mother. And of course, the funnel is the Brahman Grail. At this point, it is very, very, very wide, and you will see that it narrows as we become older. And then it widens as we're in the process of dying. This is a newborn. So where's the physical body? The physical body is around it. I was looking at a baby. I was at Mercy Hospital, one of those plate glass windows, and I was looking at a newborn. And this is what I saw internally, which is still the funnel. In other words, I won't see the triangle at that point because I was looking at the physical body and just the mind. So we have a funnel. So we have energy entering the consciousness of this child. And at this point, this is interesting, but we still have not gotten to the really fascinating piece. You notice here that there's no division between the spiritual life and the physical life of the child. There's no division, there's no roldan. That's critically important. When you have a newborn, they're not quite here. I sometimes say they haven't landed well yet. And they're very much well out there, and some people say that they're very much connected to the gods, whatever your belief system happens to be. This is a newborn several hours later. The dotted line is the roldan that is starting to form. And when I saw this information, I understood that I could not continue to wait to withhold this information, because in here we have information that's critically important about who we are at a very deep level, that part of ourselves that we would like to explore if we knew where to explore. It answers a lot of questions that religions have been trying to teach us, but that we, too many of us, myself included, have not been able to hear because the explanations did not appeal to our logical minds. So we have a newborn that is already starting to divide in the sense that he is no longer as connected to these fresh energies and is starting to become more landed on the planet and more having a division in terms of his mind, in terms of conscious and subconscious. This is a, I believe, 4-day-old baby. I'm sorry, I cannot see well because of the lights. This is my favorite sketch. And you cannot see it because it's simply a sketch. Remember, this is 360 degrees. There could be 70,000 lines, but I saw what I needed to see because that's what my system does to me. The same way as if your child calls you on the phone and she says, "Hi, how are you doing? Everything is okay." You can hear someplace that something's not okay because your system wants you to know that there's something the matter. My system wanted me to understand what it is that I was seeing. You have the transceptors, and even though this sketch doesn't show it, they are very softly moving, exploring the environment. You have the division, the roldan, which is an unusual shape, and I don't know why it's that shape. But again, I didn't take the time because I was too busy trying to put this together in a systematic way, this presentation. And you have the transceptors at the bottom. The child had colic. So these antennae, these conduits of energy, responded to the pain by moving forward. This is the basis for disease. This child's transceptors, nadis, conduits, rivers of energy, however, meridians, however you want to put it, respond to some type of pain, whether it's physical or emotional. If those conduits hold on there long enough, the muscles will start to contract. The oxygen in the blood supply will be diminished, and you have the start of what can be a disease state. This is somebody in the process of dying. I have not viewed somebody at the actual moment that they have died, but it should be simply a continuation of what you're seeing here. The transceptors are pointed up. When I see somebody or meet somebody and see this configuration, whether you've started to have the triangle at the bottom or not, I know I'm looking at somebody who's in trouble in terms of their health. And I don't know, because again, I have not had enough time to explore that either, whether this is reversible. Even though actually intuitively I know that if the person makes a decision to reverse it, they could, but they would have to make the decision at all levels. Regardless, this is somebody in the process of dying. This person, I cannot see. This was an older man in a hospice situation, and his Brahman, which is what they sometimes call that other nervous system, which is actually the original one in our system of bodies, is starting to pull away from the lower triangle, which is the triangle that represents us in the physical. So, let's look at what disease looks like. This is a woman who died of cancer. Her Roldan line, which is the division between physical and spiritual, is at her solar plexus, which means that she was coming very much from an emotional place, which I guess is obviously not unusual. In the quadrant that corresponds to fire, her conduits are twirling. They're not supposed to be doing that. They're supposed to be reaching out softly. In speaking to a relative of this person, I had validated the fact that the person had a lot of anger. When you see a lot of activity in the fire quadrant, you're looking at anger. When those conduits point downward, you're looking at somebody who doesn't do anger, that represses it. In the quadrant of water, which has to do with emotions, this person, one of the transceptors at least, remember I see very few of them compared to what's there, has absolutely gotten out of its place in line and has reached down to grab the ovary and is holding some type of thought or emotion there. That was the original site of the cancer. This is the basis for cancer. The Orientals have been telling us forever that you cannot be ill if your energy is flowing freely. And that's why they use and recommend the acupuncture, because it opens up the meridian system, which is closer to the physical body. This is an energetic system that's much further away. But this is the basis for her illness, the fact that she had an issue. That information ran along this particular quadrant, and rather than the energy flowing, she was holding on to something, and in this case it was her ovary. Hopefully I haven't triggered your boggle threshold, but this is not information that was a theory that I came up with and then tried to prove it. All of these sketches were done, most of them without knowing what the heck it was that I was doing. And not this one in particular, but I've worked with Alicia Ceballos, working with women with cancer, and I sketch the women before I actually have a history on them, and basically it's the same information. This person had female issues. It's not a surprise, especially to those of us that are in alternative, that she would have had cancer in an organ that had to do with being a female. In terms of mental illness, obviously I'm missing a lot of the conduits here. What you need to know is that this is a person who's manic depressive. This person had no conduits, in other words, no flow of energy in the quadrant, which is to you the lower right, of fire. All of the energy was in the quadrant of water, which has to do with emotions. And the conduits, the transceptors, were all twirling. And I did several of these people, with knowing that they were manic depressive, diagnosed on lithium, did not know who was in what state. And when I drew the ones that were in the manic state, this is the way they were drawn. I did not know they were in the manic state. And when we laid them all down together, I said, these three look the same, tell me about these three. And the person said, those three are right now in the manic state. So this is what a manic depressive looks like in a manic state at the consciousness level, at the causal body level. The good news is that is a level where mind creates change, where you can create your own reality. If we were indigenous Indians, we would all know that you need to augment your fire energy. I have not had time to investigate that, but if you have somebody who's manic depressive in your family, you might want to look into it. I think it should be relatively easy to look up the Indian medicine wheels, because what this is representative of the Indian medicine wheel. The indigenous Indians have contended, and the Orientals forever, that if you balance the elements in your body, which is what we're composed of, these four elements, with the element of ether, which here would be the consciousness, then you are a stable and totally healthy human being. So this is somebody with mental illness. The only arguing that went on about this presentation having to do with my co-workers was they all insisted that I show you what an ideal consciousness structure looked like, that I should draw a map of it. And I said I cannot do that because there is no ideal structure. If you are studying, you need to have a certain configuration, and if you want to be awake and aware to what's happening outside of you, you need another. But because of their insistence, I'm drawing you something which is would represent a person who spiritually is very open. Again, the shape of the grail at the top, the shape of what I call receive mode. And in the physical part, under the Rodin, all of the transceptors, which I used to call antennae until I realized that they also send information, all of those transceptors are the same length and they have the extensions on the end. These pull in information and send out information. The only problem with this is I think you would be looking at a very boring person. This person would be so balanced that this person would be boring. And so this is what I have come up with to please my staff. And so that you could have something of an understanding of perhaps the things that make us interesting are being a little bit unbalanced in certain ways. So, in the future, we're going to have mandalas, and this is what the mandalas are all about. And if you're going to study, you're going to meditate just for a few moments. It doesn't need to take 20 minutes. And your consciousness structure will entrain to that shape, and you will be ready to study, or you will be ready to play music, or you will be ready for whatever task is in front of you. And again, I'm not there yet because I simply have not had time. So now we're going to go into the interesting configurations. Not that these were not interesting. And I forgot to say something to you that's of critical importance. The original funnel that was in the newborn was being recreated again in the sketch of the person that was dying. And I believe that that is the tunnel that our consciousness travels through when we are in the process of dying. And I'm going to be very surprised if I turn out to be wrong on that. Again, I have not watched somebody in the process of dying because it's not comfortable, even though I am going to do that because it's important. But I believe that that is the tunnel that people refer to. So now we're going to go into attention deficit hyperactive disorder. Okay, these are real children and these are real sketches. How do we know this child is hyperactive? Because the two lower quadrants that have to do with the physical life are discordant. They don't match at all. When you see that, you're looking at somebody with hyperactivity. If you're seeing a female, you're probably going to see a very depressed female. If you're seeing a male, the hyperactivity acts out more. The spikes are what tell me always that somebody has attention deficit disorder. The interesting thing and the most fascinating thing about ADD, and then I'll continue with this particular child, is that biofeedback specialists contend, as I do, that people with attention deficit disorder are the most evolved people on the planet. They have what is called the new brain. They are part of our future, and they are leading us someplace. The problem is that these conduits that transmit and receive information and energy are too extensive in these children and adults. So they have reach into other dimensions and other levels of life. In children, this is not highly regarded. I get paid very well because of that. But a child who is highly intuitive and highly creative has a very hard time, because for very creative people, it's very hard to sit still, as any friend of mine will tell you. I cannot sit still. So most of these children, or all of these children, those conduits are even longer than what they appear. But in order to please their families and school and even themselves to be like other people, they have pulled in these conduits and ended up kinking up. Every place there is a point is a place where information comes through. So in these cases, with people with ADD and ADHD, information is coming through very inefficiently. It is very easy, as a matter of fact, within minutes, through mental exercises, to extend these antennae again. Why? Because this happens at your baseline level, the causal body level, and I can watch somebody and tell them simply to extend these antennae, and they will remove these spikes, and their thinking will be clearer. In my opinion, it is a shame that this information has not been available before, because we have been medicating entirely too many people, particularly children. There's a mystery out there as to why so many children are being born ADD. And there's another mystery for those of you who have small children around you as to why the kids are being born so bright and why they're learning so quickly. I don't know how many of you have experienced that. The thoughts that, my goodness, the children were not like this before in the old country or when I was young. It's because they are being born with consciousness structures that have more reach. but we're not understanding them. And in not understanding them, we're not doing just them a disservice, we're doing ourselves a disservice because they have something to teach us. These are adults and children that are very much into community. And they're very much into an awareness of the bigger picture of what's happening, not simply what's happening in front of them. And that is a reason why many times it's very hard for them to do what I consider piddling tasks, the little homeworks that they have to do. I understand that teachers are going to not be very pleased with this information, but I truly think, and not just I, but the biofeedback specialists, that these people are at the head of our evolutionary train, and that perhaps we need to look at whether we should be medicating them. This is this same child. Thank you. This is the same child, the second visit. Notice the difference between the first time that we saw him, okay, and the second time. Certainly doesn't look much better, and yet, if you can read at the bottom what it is saying, the child has improved and the mother has indicated that there's been a great improvement in the child. This is the child in the fourth visit. This is a child that I believe, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, that he was thrown out of every school he was in before he got to me, and it was well over 10 schools, and he was on 3 medications. This is the fourth visit. There's no longer any ADD. We're talking about perhaps a 2-month span of time, maybe 6 weeks, maybe 10 weeks. I'm not really sure. The breaks in the line in the fire quadrant, your lower right, had to do with the medication. So this medication was working because it was literally breaking these conduits of energy, which are the basis of our consciousness and of our structure of personality and all of the rest. Anyway, we have still a dissonance between the 2 quadrants, but we have a child who's incredibly better. At this point, the child has a lot less anger because when you get the hyperactivity, you get an awful lot of anger. And I believe this is, let me see if this is correct. Anyway, are you able to read this? Okay. Here we have absolutely no ADD, and we no longer have dissonance in the 2 quadrants, and we have a child who is begging to be taken to school and who was always on a reward system but was not winning any awards, and at this point was winning rewards because of his behavior. And certainly just in my looking at him, without having even looked at the sketch, I was looking at a child whose self-esteem has gone up dramatically. When I work with these children and with these adults and I tell them what's really going on internally, their body language changes completely, and rather than being contracted, they expand, and even in the way their faces look, they become very different. This is the structure of energy that creates your physical body and all the rest of that. So when you expand this, you literally change even physically. And even in the space of 1 visit, these children and these adults can look different. This is a child with learning disability. Those spheres at the end are blocks. In other words, information is not going to be going out or coming in, so they're very blocked. And the circling back, when I see it, I'm looking at either dyslexia or I'm looking at creativity, incredible creativity. The problem is that when you're reading a book, you don't want to be real creative. You need to read along the line and read the word as it is written so that you can understand it rather than switching the letters. So when you see this, you're looking at either somebody in a state of ecstasy having to do with playing a piano, or you're looking at somebody with dyslexia and learning disabilities. This is autism, and this is fascinating autism. The autistic structure is the proof that this is our consciousness structure and it is not ours just for this lifetime. And if I hit your boggle threshold, you need to go back to your history. Every major religion on this planet, including Catholicism, was based, when it started out in its original teachings, on the concept of reincarnation as well as other concepts. Too many people don't know that. And if you do not believe this, all you need to look up is the Council of Nicaea or the Council of Trent, and you will be able to find that several hundred years after Christ died, it was determined that reincarnation was not such a great thing for people. And it was removed from the Bible and the teachings of Christ. But in the original teachings, it's there practically in every page. So if you have any hesitation, please check it out for yourself, because without this information, you will continue to have many question marks about who you are and your relationship to other people and why you don't do so well at your job, and many issues of that nature. When somebody is pulling in their transceptors and wrapping it around themselves, you're looking at somebody who is not available to give and not available to receive. And you're describing an autistic child. How did they become autistic? And all 4 of the children that I have seen, they died a miserable, traumatic way. And the neat part of this is that past lives are almost the easiest issues to deal with. And after a healing and a past life closure, these transceptors open up very easily. And the children become very different, very available, and you're able to start teaching them. And I have a couple of parents in the audience here with children that I have worked with that can attest to that, as you will see in the video when we finish. This is the second visit of the same autistic person. You notice that the lines are much looser, and at the bottom you'll see the difference in her social life and the parents' comments. This is another autistic child, and this is the first visit. This is a child that screamed his way through his first 4.5 years of life. Past life issue, witnessed the murder of all of his family, and then himself, and was born with this configuration. In other words, certainly not in receive mode in terms of information, or in terms of giving out information. This is the second visit. Parents report his behavior is calmer and not crying as much. The child, thank God, had quieted down. His sleeping habits have shown improvement, and he was more manageable during his therapies. When I saw the child walk in the second time, I was looking energetically at a completely different child. He had changed incredibly as he continued to change. This is the same visit after we gave him a healing. Remember that I work with a group of healers and intuitives, and we work as a group with these children. And this is how he, in the space of simply one healing, how these transceptors became looser and more open and more available. And you can read at the bottom what it is that the remarks are, because I cannot see it. This is the third visit of this autistic child. Again, a lot more open, and the corresponding behavior according to the parents and to the teachers. This is the fourth visit. Totally different configuration. And you'll see this configuration later on. This means that the child at that point was centered in his heart chakra. He was no longer into the emotions of the solar plexus. He had lifted the roldan. He was trying to do more for himself. He's putting his clothes on and using a spoon. Remember when I met this child, all that he did was scream. It must have been very difficult for the parents. This is the fifth visit of the autistic child, no longer autistic. Now, does this child continue to have problems? Yes, he does. The conduits of energy in his throat chakra are closed, and we are working on opening them up so that he will be able to speak. I believe that this is a child that his therapist said he would never speak, and they have since changed their mind and said that yes, that he may speak because he's starting to say words. There are still a lot of problems, but you have to remember that this child had not developed. This child was in complete shutdown and in shock for 4.5 years of his life. This is an autistic child with an unusual situation. She had, as a matter of fact, she gave me probably several inches worth of documentation from the medical doctors as they were trying to explore what she was, and everybody concluded she was autistic, but a very unusual form of autism, or a very unusual autistic. Here I'm going to hit your boggle threshold, so hang on. In doing you notice that only one side of her structure has the conduits that cross over the center axis. What are we talking about here? Well, I really didn't know until I explored the past life in which she had died. And she died, hang on, to those of you that don't believe in reincarnation, she died in Africa. And she died either against a tree or against a wall. So one part of her body was protected, one part of her system was protected, and the other wasn't. And small animals came and were eating away at her as she was in the process of dying. So one part of her tried to move away from what was happening, and she ended up with only one side of her structure in autistic configuration. This child made wonderful improvements, and this was the second visit. And as you can see from the bottom, she's climbing more and she's balancing more, and energetically the child was completely different. Cerebral palsy. Problem with cerebral palsy children is that they don't have just issues with their Brockman Grail, which is their causal body. They have issues in their electromagnetic brain. The ones that I have seen, and there have been several, are missing entire quadrants of their electromagnetic brain. So we're not talking simply about this level and these conduits being entirely too short. But regardless of that, we continued to work with this child, and we're very pleased with the progress. The mother said the child had never slept a night through since he was born, and he was several years old. And after the first visit, he did. This is his second sketch. I still don't know what this means. But it looks promising, so we continued. This is the third one. We already have a conduit out there, and the mother at this point said that the child was very different. Everybody was noticing it, that he would follow her around the room, and that when he wanted something, that he would actually cry out to her. This is a child who was missing, and is still missing, 1/4 of his electromagnetic brain. When you get a little dent on your electromagnetic brain, your behavior changed completely, and when you get a big dent, which is a stroke, you're very, very different. This child was missing an entire quadrant, and yet we were still able to get him to respond, and I believe in the future that these children are going to be able to be helped to where they're going to be substantially different, and a lot more available and a lot more productive in terms of their lives. This is the cerebral palsy child on the 4th visit. We have the configuration we had. Darn it, I believe this is the 4th visit of the other child also. Maybe there's something magical about the 4th visit. This is in flow, heart chakra level. The sphere at the bottom would indicate a tremendous block, and that's the quadrant that has to do with emotions. Again, I'm not exactly sure what that means, because we haven't had time to do enough of them. But certainly we're looking at somebody who at a baseline level is very different in terms of the behavior. The child's behavior was very different. Changes that should not be expected of somebody who has this type of classification. I believe we're finished. Now I'm going to show you the consciousness structure of some unusual people in history. We don't need to just do problems, even though a couple of these people certainly are problems. This is Mother Teresa. Now, how do I know what Mother Teresa looks like? Because once you get past the physical body level, you don't need to be in the same room with someone. I can diagnose somebody who's on the other side of the planet, and I can also diagnose somebody who's dead. Now, if that hits your boggle threshold, you haven't been listening to what Einstein put out, what the quantum physicists have put out, and what post-quantum physicists are putting out. Time and space is not relevant once you get beyond the physical. So reading her consciousness structure was not difficult at all. Heart chakra level, obviously, the division between her physical and spiritual life was at the heart level. And this is certainly what we would expect her to look like, to be at one with the world. This is what, if she had been painted, and perhaps she's going to be painted soon, as that she would appear to have around her head because of the radiating energies, which is the radiation of life force from her head, as seen by people who have the ability to see beyond the physical. Apparently, in the Middle Ages, a lot of people could do that because a lot of the art had these. This is a musician playing a piano. This is about 15 or 20 minutes after he started playing the piano. He's looking an awful lot like Mother Teresa, but this man was in a state of ecstasy. He is very gifted, and he loved what he was doing, and he was gone. This is being, in music, I believe it's called being in the pocket, and in sports, it's called being in the flow. And what it means is that you are just at one with the universe and you are flowing. And when people are in that mode, they generally are powerful, they're winners, and they're feeling good. There is power behind this information for all of us. This is the same musician 10 minutes after he stopped playing. He's no longer in flow. The quadrant that corresponds to fire, which has to do with anger, at least that's what I know up to now, is droopy. So I asked him, do you have a hard time getting angry? And he said, oh, I never get angry. Well, I kind of knew that by looking at that. He's not very energized. And the rest of him is fine, but he's changing. This is how quickly your consciousness structure can change. So if you have a mental illness, I believe that you can start to self-correct or be helped in terms of correcting. To what extent can it be corrected, and how long will it remain in place? I don't know yet. That remains to be seen, but that is my appeal to you, that if you're alternative people, that you start investigating this or making this information available, as I will, so that other people can look into this. There's a world of information to be looked at. This is an Ayurvedic physician who lived with me for 6 months. Little did I know when I sketched him that he was a mystic. I should have been able to tell from his housekeeping habits. The division between his physical life and spiritual is a dotted line. In other words, he has a foot in the spiritual realm and a foot in the physical at the same time. His conscious and his subconscious are not very divided. This is a sketch I did. I did not know what I was looking at. Somebody wanted to impress me with their consciousness structure, and knew I was going to sketch them. I was sketching his wife, and so he went and meditated. And when he came out, this is what I sketched, and I said, why did you do that? I don't know what this is. I was really rather cranky because I expected to find a very gifted man with very long transceptors, etc. Nothing. I became aware when I started to put these together that what I'm looking at, remember, in my system, the triangle pointed up is your physical body. The cross line is the roll down, the division between the physical and the spiritual. What did he do? He took his physical body and he went through the division into, some people might call subconscious, other of us, and I will call it the spiritual aspect of yourself. So through meditation, you're not bringing what's, in terms of how he did it, the spiritual down into you, but you are actually reaching up into that aspect of yourself. I need to interject here that spiritual does not mean goodness or kindness. Spiritual means the non-physical, non-material part of yourself. Your intention is what will determine whether it's good and whether you're kind and compassionate. Dalai Lama, what do we know from this? He's in a meditative state. He's got the triangle right there, and he has a dotted line. So he's a mystic that's in a constant meditative state. Now this is actually the Dalai Lama. I put a Dalai Lama because I didn't want his office calling me and asking me what the hell right I had to sketch him. This is an interesting point because a lot of people feel that I have issues of a lack of boundary. But the truth of the matter is that a lot of you people very soon are going to be able to see, perhaps not as well as I because you won't spend as many hours a day doing it, but you're going to be able to see a lot. And these boundaries that we have between us are not going to be valid any longer. The good news is that you're going to be able to see other people's pain, and it will stop a lot of the behavior that we have. When we become aware of the results and the consequences of our actions, practically all of us, with very few exceptions, become much better people. And is at one with the universe and not have good intentions. You know who he is historically. He was a monk, very gifted, certainly very gifted with his mind, and very powerful. Because this state is a state of power, but very erratic, as you can see from the conduits. They're not flowing, they're not extended, and they're moving in all sorts of different directions as his behavior indicated. So you have the configurations, and you always have the corresponding behavior. Hitler. If we had only known, or the Germans had only known, they would possibly never have allowed him the level of power he was allowed. Fire quadrant, anger. Tremendous amount of energy. I mean, if you take that conduit and you extend it, you don't let it be contracted like that, you're talking about a hell of a lot of fire in his system. And look at how many people he killed. Look at the blocks in the water quadrant. That's the quadrant that has to do with emotions. He was very blocked emotionally. Obviously, he must have been, or he would not have killed that many people. And in the spiritual quadrants, look at the kinking, which creates issues of thought. But he had tremendous reach with his mind, but it's pretty obvious. History has let us know what this type of a configuration can lead to. The dissonance in the lower two quadrants alone should have told us that this man was troubled. Obviously, we could not see at that level, but in the future, we will be able to diagnose at this level, and people can be helped before they run into issues of self-esteem because they're not functioning properly in a particular task, in a particular job, or in school. And this will be able to save us a lot of heartache, a lot of pain, and a lot of money. So where are we at with this? We're discussing consciousness and the structure of it. The physical body, the central nervous system, takes in information from the 5 physical senses. The Brahman, which is the causal body, takes in the information from our inner senses, our inner vision, our inner ears, and other senses that supposedly are not developed yet. When you have this particular structure that I'm showing you today, in the proper configuration, you have expanded consciousness. When the conduits are extended, when they have the fingers at the end, when they're not drooping, they're not sagging, they're not grabbing an organ of yours, they're not blocking energy, you have a free flow of energy and you are physically and spiritually well. And that is the importance of this and this information. The causal body is the level or aspect of ourselves, our energetic system where cause resides. It originates. What does that mean? This is the level that the medical professions are looking at and need to look at to understand the concept of psychoneuroimmunology. That's a new term. What that means is that our thoughts and our feelings affect our health. And our thoughts and our feelings at this level cause distortions, kinking, movement of the conduits that therefore are not allowing a free flow of energy, and we become ill. This is, of course, the bottom line in terms of health. This is where the mind and body connection originates. This is the mind part of it, and then it's fed over into the body through the nervous system. But this is where the thought is that holds the energy that creates illness. It was surprising to me when I found out, when I started to work with cancer patients, and I've done very little of it, so I have no bottom line conclusions, that doctors that work with cancer patients know that the cancer started because of some emotional trauma in the patient's life, but they have not been able to give that information out to the public because they have not been able to prove it because of the scientific protocols, which have them by the throat and require that they reproduce the same thing over and over again. And there are so many factors in a human being's lives that can cause an emotional unrest to where one of these conduits, or many of them, will grip a part of your body, which creates a setup for cancer, that these doctors they're not aware of this level, granted, but they're not able to get a grip on the information consistently in order to be able to let the public know what is the bottom line in terms of cancer. So they continue to look at it in terms of a physical body ailment, in terms of the cells reproducing, and all of the rest that is told to us. At the bottom line level, it is an emotional issue that is unresolved, that creates a block in the flow of energy in a particular part of our body that creates the setup for that. As I said before, an expanded Brahman Grail creates expanded consciousness, and it also creates wonderful health. Going back to symbolism, we're going to close with Lady Di. What is it all about? What she's wearing on her head, the crowns that monarchs wear, are symbolic of the expanded consciousness of that life force radiating from the head. And we go back to Helene Lane taking a Kirlian photograph and preparing herself so that her consciousness structure radiates in this way. And you can do this also. That's the point of this whole lecture, that you can change who you are with your mind, without medication, without surgery, without years of therapy. Thank you.